radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
Indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is the Sky is Falling edition. And boy, to look at some of the stories that are dominating our corporate media, it really does appear that the sky is falling. And so we're going to do the best we can to sort some facts from fiction and hopefully help you see how scare tactics are very much at play. And, it's proven. And I'm going to show you how these tactics have worked on us before. We have a new crisis. And it's taking the place of COVID. Now that everybody's more or less getting over COVID, it's just it's time to replace it with something else for the power seekers and opportunists to exploit in their quest to gain even more power and more control over the populace. So before we begin, I want to start with this reminder from Brian Kaplan. Why you shouldn't trust mainstream media. In one sentence, he says, the media constantly shows you rare yet horrifying events to scare and anger you in order to take away your freedom. So what do those events look like? Okay, well, I don't know how rare this is. It is summertime after all, but have you seen a weather report lately? Have you had a chance to see what's happening? Look at this weather map. Does that not look like we live in hell somewhere? The flames of hell burning in Mordor. I mean, this is just beyond the pale. And look, those are pretty high temperatures, man. Texas, Arizona. Wow. That looks like July. Oh, well, it is July. I guess we see this pretty much every year. But as Mark Sisson asks, are the flames really necessary? Are these temperatures really that out of the ordinary? So let's take a look at a couple of other examples of what this looks like. This one really blew me away. This is a weather report from Europe. Look at that. Look at that intense. I mean, look, the ocean itself is a strange color and everything else has descended into, I mean, it's like the whole color code has shifted. There's no such thing as summer anymore. There is only hell and different shades of hell because climate change. Isn't that a coincidence? Here's another one. Now, this is from the same news outlet in Europe. I want you to look at the weather map before the hoax. And I believe this was from 2017. So you're looking at the temperatures there. These are in Celsius. So, it's if you don't know how to make the conversion, go ahead and do that. But then after the hoax, look at the difference. The temperatures are roughly the same. There's not that big of a variance in the temperatures. But look at the color code. And then tell me, how on earth could that not be intended to incite some kind of fear or otherwise just panic in people? Oh my gosh, the earth is burning up. And of course, it's all man-caused. But that's not all. What we can do to fix this is give those people who are in power right now more power, more of our money, and stop exercising so much freedom. We will just do that. If we will give up our freedom and give them more money, they can fix all of this. They can change the climate for us and save us from the fiery hell that is surely coming. Okay, I'm not buying it. And this, that would make me officially, I guess, a climate denier. I'm not denying that there's climate. I'm not denying there's even change. I'm just saying I don't believe for a minute that this is all man-caused. And I especially do not believe that by giving enough power and enough funding to politicians that somehow they're going to reverse this or they're going to fix it. It seems to me like power is the ultimate goal, and I have as evidence here. This is an editorial from the Boise Statesman, or the Idaho Statesman, rather. Hot enough for you? Climate change is making daily life more unbearable. So let's take a look at where they're coming from. Okay, they're using, again, rare or unusual, but not outrageous events to try to persuade us that, it's all our fault and we've got to do something about it. And by do something, they mean do what we say, which predictably always falls to more power to government, more money to government, less freedom for you, less money of your own to keep in your pocket. They say the effects of global warming are ramping up, and this year seems to be sending the message that Earth, because of climate change, is becoming inhospitable. Some places are becoming uninhabitable. Downtown Montpelier, the capital of Vermont, has been hit with floods that damaged thousands of homes and businesses. Yeah, those things happen elsewhere too, but please go on. The city had a record-setting 5.2 inches of rainfall in one day, according to the National Weather Service. That's more than any other day on record, including even when Hurricane Irene dropped 5.27 inches of there in 2011. That's according to CNN. All right, well, let's talk about some more examples then here. They say flash flooding in Pennsylvania has killed at least 6 people, cut power to thousands, canceled flights, and left untold damage in its wake. Similar historic floods have been seen in South America, Canada, and across Europe and Asia this year. Meanwhile, wildfire smoke from Canada has choked cities from Chicago to New York, casting some cities in an apocalyptic orange glow. A heat wave in much of the United States has been going on for more than a month and is expected to last into August. Again, that's consistent with summer. So it's not like, my gosh, that's never happened before, at least in the northern hemisphere. More than 2,300 heat records have fallen from Florida to California. Now, as kind of an interesting aside, it was one of the members of the squad in Congress made this incredible claim why it was the hottest day recorded in 120,000 years. Which we're supposed to understand as 120,000 years ago when whatever predated cavemen was keeping records, and accurate records at that. You know, the temperatures that they've recorded since that time, you know, this was the hottest of them all. I'm not buying it. That sounds like exaggeration to me, or it sounds like fear-mongering, but hey, what do I know? I'm just a climate denier, right? I'm just not somebody who can deal with reality. All right, back to the editorial. Power grids are straining under the increased electricity use from air conditioners. Texas and Phoenix broke electricity use records, and the state of California has asked residents to set their thermostats at 78 degrees to avoid grid failures. Now, they've been having power troubles all along. They've had rolling brownouts now for years in California. Get this next bit of fear-mongering, though. If the grid were to fail in Phoenix, half of the city's 1.6 million people would need medical attention, and they predict more than 13,000 people would die, according to a recent study highlighted in Wired magazine. Okay, has anything like that happened before, or is this just a projection? It's important because that's a big number of people. That's a scary number of people, but isn't that kind of how they predicted, you know, people were going to be dropping like flies during COVID? We'll get back to that in just a moment. Unusually hot summer days have become more common, according to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, which is an agency which, by the way, depends upon fomenting fear and, consternation about climate change. And hot summer nights are increasing at an even faster rate. Heat waves with hot nights are especially dangerous, according to the EPA, because they give people less opportunity to cool off and recover from daytime heat. Now, not mentioned here is the fact that in cities where you have a great deal more asphalt and concrete and man-made materials, which actually absorb the solar radiation and the heat from the day, of course it's going to hold on to heat longer. It's passive heating. But in the countryside where there's greenery and there's winds blowing and so forth, no, it's not nearly as bad. During the last decade, there were an estimated 12,000 premature heat-related deaths in the contiguous United States, according to one study. Well, as long as we're citing studies, then I guess we have to go along with it. So what should we do about this? Well, we're starting to see impacts our ability to live on the planet. We've always known, you like that assumption? We've always known, we, the collective we, everyone here, we've always known that it's an existential threat. Have we, Your Majesty? No, we have not always known this, but now we're seeing it come to fruition. This is collectivist, group manipulation techniques at their finest. But here's their real beef. Ridiculous fights over library books that teach kids how to have, freaky sex and to question their gender and maybe consider permanently altering their developing bodies prior to puberty. Hunter Biden's laptop, which is filled with evidence of his family's crimes, whether to drink Bud Light or whether M&Ms are woke. In other words, pushback on the agenda that is being forced down our throats everywhere we turn should seem inconsequential compared with the real threats posed by climate change. Thus speaketh the Idaho statesman. We are like the proverbial frogs in a pot of water, and things are starting to boil. Okay, what I take away from this is, yes, I get it. They're very concerned, and perhaps rightly so. I don't like the heat. I would prefer the cold. I look better in bulky clothes. I prefer, the fact that in cold weather, at least I can put on more clothes. But when it gets hot, you can only take off so much, and you're still dying of heat. but it's the solution that they're pushing. It's the solution that others on the political left have been pushing for a long time. And I showed you the slide here a couple of shows ago of, the tip of the iceberg is climate change, a very ambiguous term which can mean anything. Remember, a couple of years ago, they were getting mad at us when people would say, well, look how cold it is. Well, that weather's not climate. But now we're being told that, yes, in fact, it is. The bottom of that iceberg, though, is Karl Marx, or at least it's Marxism. And that seems to be the only cure that they can offer to remedy the situation. We need to collectivize everything. We need to make sure that everybody obeys the central plan, and then everything is going to be great. Again, that's based on the presumption that man can actually control the environment, which, again, I don't buy into, and frankly, I don't know of any thinking person who doesn't at least question this at some level. Yes, we'll control we'll block the sun, we'll do whatever it takes. Power-hungry people have been after power for a long time. I have no reason to think that they're going to stop. This is just the latest excuse, and since COVID is no longer scary to people, this is what they've got to use in order to get us afraid. Oh, and maybe you've noticed this. Have you noticed how obsessed kids are with climate change? Because they're being indoctrinated into it at a very young age. This is almost a symbol of how virtuous you are as a person. How concerned are you with climate change? I mean, kids will go home from school having been trained, if your parents aren't recycling, they're destroying the planet. If your parents keep the thermostat above 75 degrees or below 75 degrees, that is bad news, and it's destroying the planet. Not to worry, though. Look at this, the city of Boise. We are taking bold climate action steps, and we are bringing young Boise leaders to the table to help drive meaningful solutions. What a lovely word salad. Join the 2023-24 Youth Climate Action Council to help guide Boise to a more resilient future. This is where the training and indoctrination takes place. We're looking for a few good little Marxists that we can train to become climate activists and to get out there and stump for, more government control over the economy, more government control over your life, and, of course, more ability to coerce you into following the central plan. Now, just to put this into perspective, and again, this comes down to the idea that media exists to tell us scary things, to try to get us outraged, to get us fearful, and then to get us to obey, and at least to not question or to be too skeptical about it. We're not supposed to question these things, after all. You're not an expert, and I'm not an expert, as if only experts can make those kinds of important decisions. I like how Jeffrey Tucker puts it. Jeffrey Tucker says, it's amazing times. We all nearly died from COVID. Then half of humanity discovered they've been misgendered from birth. And within the blink of an eye, we're all being burned up by a sun, very angry at our gas stoves and long car trips. I like that he can do that with a sense of humor. And you do need to keep a sense of humor. But the bottom line is, power mongers are going to go after more power. They are looking for excuses, to try to gain greater control. And it all comes back to central planning. We've got to plan this thing centrally. No one can make up their own mind about where to keep their thermostat or what their car, what kind of mileage it must get or so forth. No. Only the planners, only the experts, the people in power can decide that. And they want more power, and they want more of your tax money. So seems to me that that's a pretty self-serving conclusion. But again, I'm just a skeptic. I'm encouraging you to be skeptical as well. All right. Speaking of a little selective outrage, check this out. Lauren Nicochia, in an editorial published in today's Sometimes News, magicvalley.com, a lack of leadership is leaving kids hungry this summer. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the state of Idaho actually refused to participate in a federal program that would fund certain meals for kids. Now, I want you to hear her reasoning as to why this is such an intolerable thing, that we wouldn't be taking this federal money or wouldn't be implementing another federal program or federally funded program. She says, I have to believe that no Idahoan wants to let a child go hungry. Making sure our children are nourished requires special attention in summer. When school meals are unavailable, there is additional pressure on families earning modest wages, and it's harder to make groceries stretch. So the first thing I have to ask is, really, when school meals are unavailable, I mean, are we already just agreeing that the only possible solution here is that, the school or some government-run system is the only way that these kids are going to get the meals that they need? And by the way, is there no question as to why families are having a harder time making ends meet? Do government policies ever play into that? I know I'm asking something that really should not be asked, at least in polite society, but is it possible that government policies tax too much of the parents' money away from them? that it artificially raises prices on things like gasoline when they stifle, the exploration and extraction of fossil fuels, to save the planet. Wink, wink. Yeah. Never a question as to whether, these high prices and the financial struggles that people are facing have anything to do with government policies. I happen to think that there's probably a pretty good likelihood that they do. But government is here with the solution. Here, I broke your leg. Let me hand you this crutch. You can thank me whenever is convenient for you. Let's go on here. Nico Chia says, it's confounding, therefore, that Idaho opted out of a summer food program that would have fed 123,000 kids across the state with $15 million available for our families. The root cause of this failure is poor leadership. Under single-party rule, a complete lack of accountability, compounded by decades of underinvestment in our schools, ultimately failed our kids. Okay, let's run that through the translator. $15 million available. From where? The state of J.R. Simplot bequeath $15 million and all we had to do was sign on the dotted line and there it was? No. This is $15 million of taxpayer money, presumably offered by the federal government with strings for those states that want to take advantage of it. But when she says it's poor leadership, is it? For instance, if leadership is actually adhering to the proper role of government, and look, as much as I agree, nobody wants to see a kid go hungry. It's not the proper role of government necessarily, though, to feed kids in families where they're struggling to make ends meet. It's not. Because any government that's big enough to take care of all of your needs is also big enough to take all of those things away from you when it deems it necessary or advantageous to those in power. Under single-party rule, a complete lack of accountability. Actually, I think it's that accountability that is the reason why you are seeing more and more conservative Republicans finding positions of power in the state. And listen to this, compounded by decades of underinvestment in our schools. Idaho schools have never been on the receiving end of more money than they are right now. And the question is, well, when is it enough? You know what the answer is. It's never. It's never going to be enough, and Nico Chia needs to be at least honest enough to admit that. But ultimately, this is what failed our kids. So let's continue with this guilt trip. I hope you packed lightly. This new federal program first launched in 2020. This is part of COVID relief, providing eligible families with the cost of breakfast and lunch that their children receive during the school year when school is out. These extra funds for food cost Idaho nothing. That's not exactly true because they do come with strings attached. And once the program's in place, is there not an expectation, well, the state's going to continue this, perhaps even on its own dime? But she doesn't mention anything about that. But required coordination between the State Department of Education and the Department of Health and Welfare to determine eligibility and administer benefits. Now, again, there is a very vital question that is lacking here, and I hate to sound like a miserly old Republican, but Lauren, where are you asking the question? At whose expense? I mean, it's like I've seen people with a strong sense of entitlement. This is perhaps one of the strongest examples I've seen in a long time. But at whose expense? The taxpayer is just expected to pony up, shut up, and hand this money over with zero complaint or zero questions. I don't think so. That doesn't make sense to me. Our children's access to food should have been a serious priority. That should be a priority. But again, is it the proper role of government? That's the question that has to be answered. It's harder for kids to learn on an empty stomach, and food insecurity impacts everything from a child's mental and physical health to their future economic prosperity. That's why it's crucial to take advantage of every opportunity to nourish our kids. She's not wrong, except that she's looking to government as the only possible solution. How many food banks are there out there that are voluntarily funded and supplied by their communities? That's the way it used to be done. And that's the way that actually it can be done that doesn't create generations of dependence on a government system and bureaucratic overhead that goes on in perpetuity. But again, that's kind of where she finds job security as well as others. And by the way, there's Republicans that feel the same way too. So it's not like Lauren Nicochea is really the only one who feels like this. The uncomfortable truth, she says, is that elected Republicans calculated that they could deny Idaho families their due benefits. There's that entitlement again. Their due benefits. Did they earn that? Did they in some way, other than just existing and breathing air, qualify for the fruits of someone else's labor? Again, I'm not trying to be mean here. I'm asking a question. How far can that be taken before we're dealing with indentured servitude or slavery, to the unfortunate class? Charity is a good thing, but it has to be voluntary for it to be charity. This is forced giving. It's not charitable. But they could deny those benefits without any consequences because the kids going at risk of going hungry have no political power. Oh, well, what do? Drop the voting age to age 5? So the little kids in the indoctrination centers, in the public schools can be indoctrinated as to how to vote, to better vote more benefits for themselves and their parents. And Idaho Party, this is perfect too. The Idaho Republican Party's walled off primary elections reward not what is right, but what is most extreme. She's got that 100% backwards. Those primary elections help to keep people who are activists from exploiting the system and taking government out of its proper role and into extreme situations where it really has no business to be trying to solve problems. Denying summer meals for Idaho children is an administrative failure and a moral outrage. Yes, to Ms. Nicochia, I'm sure that it is. One-party rule will continue to harm Idahoans and put our shared prosperity, that's a little communist thing there, our shared ours at risk until we change it. I'm sorry. It's, it comes off sounding so much more communist when you read it with just a little different emphasis. But what she's asking for is again, it's collective. Only the state can solve these problems. But is it really solving problems, or is it creating more problems? If it's creating generational dependency, then it's not really solving a problem. It's extending a problem now generations into the future, which is what the so-called war on poverty and, of course, the Great Society that Lyndon B. Johnson tried to implement have done. That has actually destroyed more families than it ever saved. I mean, there's a reason that charitable giving was handled as much as possible on the local level, because there are truly needy people. And there is something very noble and good about voluntary charity. But when it's forced, it's not a moral thing anymore. It's an imperative that's backed by the threat of government force. You will do this, you will hand over your money, or men with badges and guns will come and punish you for failing to hand over your money in a timely fashion. That's not compassionate. And again, this is just politicians looking for a chance to appear like I'm doing something. But Nicochia, has she ever produced anything of value herself? I mean, she's very good at demanding this is what needs to be done with other people's money because they deserve it, pointing at those hungry kids. What have you created of value? What have you done that would lead out and show the way? You're just talking about we need to confiscate money from people and put it to work in the way that I deem fit. And to me, that's just, it's unconscionable. And again, it's a departure from the proper role of government. That's what's wrong with it. All right, shifting gears again. I want to recommend, if you're not doing it already, I would like you to consider following Casey Whalen's reporting on Twitter. Casey is an independent journalist, and I'm probably underselling him by a long shot here, but between the Idaho Tribune and Casey, there is some serious reporting that is taking place in North Idaho, and it is so refreshing to have an alternative to the mainstream spin machine, especially when stories like this come out. I don't know. I only found one outlet that was really trumpeting this, but Idaho jury finds 5 from white nationalist group guilty of criminal conspiracy to riot at Pride event. Now, you remember, this is back in September of last year. Members of the group Patriot Front were arrested at a Coeur d'Alene Pride rally, or near a Coeur d'Alene Pride rally, apparently because there were plans, so we were told, that they were to riot. I would really recommend, if you haven't seen Casey's reporting on this, you should probably check it out, because there's a lot of discrepancies, as in, how did the FBI get this inside information, which was then fed to Idaho State Police and other local police? No riot took place, no disruption took place. But boy, the bottom line is they punished these guys not for anything they actually did, but for what they might have done. And even beyond that, there's a further message that is being sent here, and that is there are some things you cannot challenge. Now, Casey Whalen, in reporting on this, says he has footage from the courthouse there from the jury trial for Patriot Front members Devin Center, James Johnson, Forrest Rankin, Derek Smith, and Robert Whitted at the Kootenai County Courthouse. Today, Devin Center and Robert Whitted took the witness stand called by the defense. More detail was uncovered regarding Patriot Front's march in the downtown area near the Coeur d'Alene Park, where Pride in the Park was held. Oh, I guess this was back in June. My apologies. It wasn't September. It was June 2022 by the North Idaho Pride Alliance. Now, Casey also reports that Exhibit 12 outlined Patriot Front's plan of action for that day in which no violence was mentioned or promoted. Exhibit 13, a speech the leader of Patriot Front, Thomas Rousseau, was to give that day, highlighting the dangers of indoctrinating youth into drag queen culture. The document also strongly promoted the ideals of a healthy American family. Now, the jury, of course, following instructions and not understanding the power of the jury to remedy injustice, ruled a guilty verdict to all five for conspiracy to riot. And if I sound skeptical of this, well, of course, it's probably because you're a white nationalist yourself. Oh, worse, I'm a Christian white nationalist, I'm sure, at least by virtue of the fact that I'm a Christian and I do, love my country, and, I can't change my skin color. But, besides that, you're probably reading a little more into it than actually exists. But we've entered the era of pre-crime. I mean, this is right out of, the Minority Report story by Philip K. Dick, where, police now will be punishing people for what they might have done as opposed to what they have actually done. And the idea to me that, Patriot Front, if in fact that's who these guys were, and it appears, that some of them legitimately were members of this group, were there to stand up against this forced indoctrination or this seduction of children into a deviant culture. Now, does that mean that every person who stands against drag queen culture and, these pride events is cut from the same cloth? Absolutely not. I think what it shows you, if anything, though, is that the concern over the dissolution of the family and the disintegration of the family crosses a lot of different lines. Some of them that maybe you and I would not be willing to cross ourselves in terms of, I'm not going to go march with the Patriot Front members. But I do think that it's appropriate that people peacefully stand up and protest this. Now, had their behavior shown something, had they actually engaged in violent behavior, I absolutely would not be calling any of this into question. But they didn't. So if we're to the point where we're punishing pre-crime, that's a problem, because now we're getting into thought police territory, and that's a very, very dangerous place to go, because pretty much anything can now be considered, a dangerous kind of thing. Look at all the stuff that's considered right wing right now. Do you exercise? Well, that's right wing. Do you eat healthy? That's right wing. Do you have a family and love them? That's right wing. Do you work hard and show up on time? That's also right wing. Wow. Are you successful in your endeavors? That's also right wing. Okay, so what is acceptable to the people who are labeling everything it's right wing, and therefore it's a dangerous thing? Are you supposed to be sad, fat, ugly, lonely, broken, depressed before you can be considered a decent person? I mean, and I'm only saying this halfway tongue in cheek, because that victimhood mentality seems to be a key part of their gospel. It's like the foundational cornerstone. Well, if you're not a victim, then you have some responsibility for your own circumstances. Victims, on the other hand, have absolutely no responsibility, and therefore they get a pass. Yeah, I'm not buying it. And I don't think you should either. I think that there's some pretty sick minds at work here trying to convince us that everything that's good is bad and everything that's questionable is mandatory. Not willing to play that game. One final note here before we wrap it up. I loved this from Stop Idaho Rhinos. Has anyone else noticed that 13 of the 14 shamed Idaho legislators that were given a vote of no confidence by the state GOP are prominent members of the new Main Street Idaho Caucus? Talk about a movement that's looking for legitimacy. Several of the other members should also be given a vote of no confidence by the county GOP that they reside within. And here are the caucus members. The one with the checks are the 13 shamed members. Now, I'm just going to show you quickly the names. I'm not going to go through and read them all off, but these are the ones that don't have the check marks. They didn't get officially shamed, but here are the ones that did. What do they all have in common? What they have in common is all of them talk the talk of, I am a conservative individual. I believe in less government. I believe in lower taxes. I support the Second Amendment. I am all about, defending your freedoms, until it comes time to actually stand up and act, at which point in time they are anything but a friend of freedom. So their actions don't match their words. They are the epitome of Republicans in name only. And if those are your representatives or legislators, you should probably take a real hard look at them before you consider sending them back to represent you at the state capitol. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.